Welcome back to Books and Beyond with That Guy Jay. I'm your host, That Guy Jay, and today we're going to start with our watch of the day real quick. Our watch of the day is the Casio MRW200H. This is a fantastic daily wear. It's super legible with the dial and the numbers. It's also a day and date, so you always can know what day and day it is. And it's a quartz watch, so you never have to wind it. You put a battery in it once every few years and you're good to go. These are another Casio that's available on Amazon for right around $20. Now, jumping into today's main topic, I do have some notes here because there's a lot of information for today. Today, we are going to be talking about banned books. Now, this is a topic that's not just about books. To me, this is about freedom, this is about truth, and this is about the right to tell our stories. So let's dive into this and discuss not only banned books, but why I think it's so important to read them and why I also think it's so important to have physical copies of banned books. I think one of the clear signs of a free society is freedom of speech. And I think, of course, this does run the risk of running into words and even ideas and things that you don't agree with. But the answer shouldn't be censorship. I think in most situations, the answer should be more speech, more dialogue, more discussion, more understanding, more learning. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule. Hate speech doesn't need to exist. I think most of us can agree on that. I wish it was all of us. But in general, censorship should never be the answer. What's particularly troubling about banned books is that it so often targets our most marginalized communities. Stories with almost any aspect of LGBTQ have been under fire in recent years. Books sharing POC experiences have also always historically been attacked and challenged. And another one that is very troubling that I think is a more recent trend is anything that challenges difficult historical facts from our past or from any nation's past. These two seem to be a target. By attempting to silence these voices, we're not only hurting these particular communities, we're also putting society as a whole at risk. Because here's the simple truth. In my opinion, we can never grow by ignoring our past. We cannot build a better future by silencing the voices of the people who need to be heard the most. When we ban the books that tell the stories of the most marginalized communities or confront uncomfortable historical facts, we're not protecting anyone. We're just repeating the same patterns that caused harm in the first place. So what's the goal of today's podcast? Well, today we're going to take a look at some specific examples of banned books. We're going to go over the reasons that are given for why they were challenged. And we're going to discuss why it's so crucial to continue to read these stories. I'm going to be sharing information from PEN America's most recent article about this. We'll also discuss who PEN of America is, and we're going to dive into some patterns that I've noticed in which types of books tend to be banned the most. And finally, we will discuss why I think owning physical copies is vitally important, and also some recommendations on where you can find physical copies for affordable prices. We're all on a budget in the current economy. So let's dive into the top 11 books banned in 2024, according to PEN of America. First, what is PEN of America? PEN America is a nonprofit organization that advocates for free expression and literary freedom. They work to defend the freedom to write and to protect writers who are at risk. PEN America promotes free speech, advocates for writers at risk, supports literary awards and grants, works to address online abuse and digital safety, raises awareness about book bans and educational censorship, and they support prison and justice writing. PEN America's principles, they oppose censorship and the suppression of freedom of expression. They support a free press, and they promote mutual respect between peoples and nations. So as of 2024, according to PEN America, the number one banned book was 19 Minutes by Jodi Picoult. Having the most banned book in the country is not a badge of honor. It's a call for alarm, Picoult said. 19 Minutes is banned not because it's about a school shooting, but because a single page that depicts a date rape and uses anatomically correct words for the human body. The number 2 most banned book in the country was Looking for Alaska by John Green. Looking for Alaska had 97 bans, and it's one of the most challenged books in recent years. And it is always challenged because it includes mature content with strong language and sexual scenes. The number 3 most banned book was The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. The Perks of Being a Wallflower has been challenged and sometimes banned in certain schools due to concerns about its depiction of sexual content, drug use, profanity, and its inclusion of the LGBTQIA community. The 4th most banned book was Sold by Patricia McCormick. This one was challenged for being sexually explicit and discussing rape. The 5th most banned in the country is actually a tie, the first book being 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. This one is often challenged because of depictions of teen suicide, profanity, and sexual situations. The second book in this 5th place tie is the Crank series by Ellen Hopkins. This book is challenged because of drug use, adult language, and sexual situations. The 7th most banned book in the country last year was Identical by Ellen Hopkins. This one is challenged because some found the themes within this book uncomfortable. Those themes included self-harm, sexual situations, drug use, alcohol use, eating disorders. The 8th most banned book in the country was The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. This one is challenged because of depictions of rape and the thought that this book would lead to terrorism. Number 9 is a classic, and that is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This one is challenged because of mature situations, adult language, profanity, sexual situations, LGBTQIA characters, and anti-Christian views. In 10th place, again, was a tie between 2 books, the first of which was Water for Elephants by Sarah Gruen. This one is challenged because of animal abuse depicted within the circus. And the last book on this list, tied for 10th place, is Tricks by Ellen Hopkins. And this one was challenged for realistic descriptions of sexual activity and drug use. This list surprised me a little bit because it had several books on here that I had never heard of before. It had a couple of classics that I expected would be on there, and it was missing a couple of classics that I expected to see. Now, if you look at the top 100 banned books ever, you're going to get a different 100 books depending on the source. But I wanted to go over a couple that are commonly on that list. In fact, I think they're on every version of that list I've seen. And kind of the irony of these books now being banned books, because a lot of these books were actually required reading for me back when I was in high school. And I know that high school was just over 20 years ago for me, but that's still fairly recent history. And it feels like a complete 180 to go from required reading to now being on banned lists. And those books would include things like, a few of them are actually above me on the shelf. We have 1984 and Animal Farm by George Orwell, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, The Giver by Louis Laurie, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and then on to some popular books like The Hunger Games that often end up on banned book lists as well. I find particular irony in the fact that many of these banned books are dystopian futures caused by corrupt governments. I think it's extremely troubling that people would want to ban this idea and not allow people to have access of stories to what can happen to society when governments are allowed to run amok. I think it becomes extremely hypocritical, not only ironic, that this is the case. From my own research, I've basically seen that books get banned for 3 different reasons, or you could at least put them into 3 different categories. By and far, the largest of these groups is anything with sexual content, especially if it's LGBTQIA related. In the last decade, LGBTQ books have probably been the most challenged as a genre out of anything out there. I've always found this extremely weird about the United States. Violence is usually widely accepted, but anything with sexual content is considered outrageous, inappropriate, and should be hidden in the shadows. I think deep down this likely comes from our Puritan background, but this is something that I think we need to move away from as it's hundreds of years behind the time. We should not, as a nation, be okay with children being exposed to violence, but being upset about them being exposed to normal, everyday relationships that include sexual activity. Children being exposed to trans people, to gay people, to queer people is not going to make them more likely to be gay. It's not shoving it down their throat. It's just exposing them to the types of people that exist in the world. Again, I've just always found it so troubling how people want to pick apart normal sexual activity or any sexual activity, because realistically what goes on in people's bedrooms is not our business, but they are okay with heavy violence, and children get exposed to that even by just watching the news. And I think the second category that banned books fall into is dystopian futures. Almost all dystopian futures end up in the situations that they're in because of tyrannical or fascist governments. Governments who censor what you can read. Governments that don't allow you to read. Governments that don't allow you to have freedom of movement. All of these things. And it's so troubling to me that these stories are not fully being allowed to be told. Although The Hunger Games is fiction, I think that people, including teenagers, should be able to read about a world that ends up in this situation, because it's not that far from a possible reality if things go wrong. A lot of people like to sit and say that these things aren't possible, but we've seen it happen over and over and over again throughout history. It's all entirely possible. And reading about a fictional world where it happens only makes you more aware of the negative signs to look out for. It helps you locate red flags, and it helps you think more freely. And I think the third category would be the religious category. And specifically what I mean by this is anything that is not Christian or anything that is critical of Christianity. For example, Cat's Cradle, which is a classic sci-fi to many people, often ends up on banned books list because it has a satirical view of religions in general, but specifically Christianity. Books like The Kite Runner get banned because they think that it's somehow going to be pro-Islam and create American terrorists. Freedom of religion means freedom of all religion. That's something that I think has been lost over the decades. The United States was not found as a Christian nation, and nor should it be. In any true free society, people should be allowed to participate or not participate in any religion of their choosing, as long as it falls within the laws of that nation. Banning books that are fictional and criticize religion is just, it's crazy to me. Religion should be allowed to be challenged, especially in a fictional world. We should be encouraging the next generation to be free thinkers, to take in input from many directions, and to form their own opinions. We should not be censoring certain things so that they end up the way that a different group is trying to make them. Or we shouldn't be censoring the different group because we want them to end up a certain way that we believe in. We should be looking for growth generation after generation. And censoring books will never get us there. And next, I would really like to talk about why I think it is super important that we all have and keep physical copies of books in general, but especially banned books. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of this, but we all love our Kindles. But Amazon, being the large corporation that it is, they're not necessarily the good guy. In fact, in most situations, they are not. And they have a lot of control over our digital libraries. The fact that we paid money for it does not guarantee that we'll get to keep it. If bans go into effect, and I've already seen this happen in times where the Kindle store has removed things from KU, they've removed things from the Kindle library altogether where they can't be purchased anymore. And I do believe that they have the ability to just completely block you from from accessing certain books in your own library on your own device. We should not be relying on technology that's controlled by large corporations who are heavily influenced by the government for our access to this information and this media. And for that reason, we should all be looking to collect physical copies of banned books. I think in many cases, if we have the means, we should be collecting multiple copies of the banned books that we think are the most important. For me, that would be books like 1984 and Animal Farm and The Handmaid's Tale and Fahrenheit 451. I do own multiple copies of these books. I have owned multiple copies of these books. I've given some away. I've lent some out with no expectation of getting them back. And I think it's important that we have this ability to lend these books to others within our community. I'm actually planning on working on that throughout 2025. I'm going to collect as many free or extremely low cost banned books as I can and start leaving them in the local little libraries that I see when I'm driving around doing errands. I also plan to have copies on my bookshelf at all times so that my daughter has access to them. If any of her friends need access to them, if anyone among my immediate family or friends, my community needs access to them, I will have them. Now, I know that this is a financial burden, and for a lot of us, buying books is a luxury, and the Kindle editions are free or so cheap and it's hard to compete with. But I do have some resources and ways that you can get them as cheap as a Kindle or near as cheap. My first advice would be thrifting. I have found countless editions, different copies, different covers of many different banned books. The thrift store that I frequent the most, all books are under $3, and the books are often 50 to 75% off. I've gotten some banned books for as low as 50 cents. Another great resource, and this also supports your local library, is library sales. They leave books in circulation for a certain amount of times. I don't know exactly the rules, but they have a system set up so that the books are always in good shape for people who need them. And that means that multiple times a year they are doing sales. And I think a lot of their sales start at 25 cents and go up to maybe $4 to $6 for hardcovers. It's a great way to support your local library, and it's a great way for you to look for banned books for, again, extremely affordable prices. Another resource is actually eBay. eBay has a ton of used books, and I don't understand how they can often sell them so cheap and have free shipping, but it's something that exists, and it's something that I've utilized many times. My preferred method would be an app/site called Pango Books. I myself do have a Pango bookstore. I have sold books on there. I have bought books on there. I love Pango Books. I will always advocate for them. I think it's a great platform that gives people the ability to have their own mini online bookstore, and they can set their own prices. They can set their own shipping. They can have multi-book discounts. And it's another place where I have gotten books from the banned book list, and I have gotten books for as cheap as $1. And I've gotten free shipping on orders when I do multiple books in one purchase. It's an absolutely great resource. I think it's also a good way to share some of these banned books that you find. You can put them on Pango Books and sell them for a very affordable price to move them along to someone maybe outside of your local community. Give someone who may be in a more heavily censored area the ability to get these books for an affordable price. All in all, I think that Pango Books is a fantastic choice. Another place is actually going to be Facebook Marketplace. I have gotten large lots of books for very low prices. Like I'm talking 100 books for $10. Sorting through that, there were several books that were on the banned book list. There were several books that I now have copies of that are not highly available, not high print numbers of books. It's also a great way to start building your library. You can sort through and keep the ones that you're interested in and pass along the ones that you're not to local free little libraries. And the final place is flea markets. I haven't had a ton of luck there with my local flea market having book vendors available often, but I know in other places book vendors are far more common. And this is another great way to get a lot of banned books for a very affordable price. And real quick, I'd actually like to circle back to the library sales. In general, I think that we should all be supporting our local libraries. There are parts of the country and there are certain states where they do ban books at libraries, And if you live in one of those areas, I still think it's highly important that you utilize the library services. As communities, we don't just want libraries, we need them. We need to support them so they can continue to exist and continue to get the funding that they so desperately need. Using Hoopla and Libby does support your library, so these are options as well. It's a great way to read banned books because depending on where you live, a lot of them will be available for free in digital and audio, which is a fantastic choice. I think it's a great way to access them for yourself on a one-time basis, but I still think we should be seeking out the banned books that we connect with the most, the ones that we find most important, just because that's a great starting point. The banned book lists are so huge, there's no way we could own them all each individually. It would get too expensive. But look into what other activities or services your local library offers. One of my goals for 2025 is to get to physical libraries more often. I'm still working on that, but I mean, we're only 3 weeks into the year, so I think I have time, but it's definitely one of my top goals. And it's something that I think we should all do a bit more of. They receive funding based on the usage that they get. So we don't want to stop using them because we certainly never want to lose them. If libraries go away, I don't see how we would ever get anything like them back. It's not a service that would be created in 2025. I truly believe that. To circle back around and start working towards wrapping things up here, I think in general it's always extremely important to talk about censorship. I think we should be talking about banned books always. The reason I chose to have this as the topic of this week's episode is I think it's pretty clear. It's the state of the world right now, especially the state of what's happening in the United States currently. We're 1 week into extremely uncertain times, and I think now more than ever, it is so important to be talking about banned books. It's so important to be spreading these stories. It's so important to be engaging within our own communities, but also learning about other communities. I don't think we can ever truly help each other if we don't truly know what other communities are going through, because we won't know how to help them. I don't think we know how to help ourselves as a nation if we don't know what all of our people are going through. And by closing off access to these marginalized community stories, we won't know, and we can't help them, and we can't help ourselves as a nation. I know that these are stressful times. I know that these are difficult times. I know that a lot of people are probably struggling mentally. Another thing that I wanted to say is I think it's okay to check out a little bit from so much social media. It can be overwhelming. These apps are designed to keep you locked in and to keep scrolling and to keep seeing more. It's okay to take a break. If you are a book talk content creator, it's okay to not post for a day or two if you're just feeling a little bit down. For most of us, all of this content creation is just a hobby. It's just for fun. You don't owe anything anyone. One of my book talk friends was actually discussing that today, and I just wanted to piggyback off of that idea because I also think that that's very relevant and very important in these very overwhelming times. To close things out on a slightly more positive note, I would love to hear from you in the comments. What are your favorite books that are banned? Is that different from your favorite banned book to recommend to others? Which do you think is the most important? Which do you think everybody should read? What are the ones that should be required reading in high school? I would love to hear all of it. Let's get conversations going in the comments. Let's continue to build community, continue to support these stories. Thank you again for spending a little bit of time from your week with me and the Books and Beyond podcast. I appreciate you all so much. I appreciate the support. As always, if you could like, share, comment, it would mean so much to me. But I'll be back next week on another episode of Books and Beyond with that guy Jay. Thank you.